Hey, you guys, welcome back to the Forming Women podcast. This has been such a fun conversation. I've enjoyed it. Me and Alyssa haven't done something together for years. It's like we fell off the map, but we're back, baby. We're back, and we're doing it under the Forming Women banner, which feels weird to me, but but here we are. I'm absolutely loving it. I'm joking. I'm the host here. I'm having fun, adding my thoughts here and there. But let's keep pressing in. Let's keep pressing in. And I think this episode we wanted to kind of call Desires and Disappointments, and something that is two topics, two things, two principles that are very, very important to wrestle with, to understand, and to navigate, certainly as you kind of start getting into midlife of like, what does that look like? What does that mean to even know yourself? What are desires? How do you deal with them? What do you do when desires turn into disappointments? And so, yeah, let's kick us off.
First of all, I would love to hear from a man's perspective. What goes through your mind when we say desires and disappointments? Because I could name, like, for women, that could go in 1,000 ways.
No, I think it's the same for men. I think it's like just life, man. You desire your the telos of your life, which is that Greek word of kind of that North Star in which your brain is constantly subconsciously pursuing a vision for your life. Because of course there's the primal desires, sexual desires, food desires, stuff like that. But I think a lot of times, the real desires are those ones you daydream about, of like these like your heart, what your heart is longing for, to be seen, to be known, to be loved. And you usually have a vehicle in which that's true. And so you're either pinning that up on a job, you're pinning that up on a promotion, a significant other, some result you're looking for in life. And then disappointments is completely always related to desires, because it's usually then significantly linked to when we don't get the desires we want.
Yeah.
So I don't know, what would you say?
Good. Well, I love this topic so much, and I think it's so important to talk about because I think so many of us naturally have a lot of desires. But, John Mark Comer talks about strong desires versus deepest desires, and how, gosh, I feel like
your
for
strongest
women,
desire is not always your deepest desire.
Yeah, but the strongest desire can just be the immediate, quick on your mind, more like surfacey level. For a woman, I feel like today it could be like, I want to live a non-toxic life. I want to have a latte. I want to have a golden doodle. I want to go shopping and look really cute. And I need to feel young and beautiful.
Every white female, 30 years old in Franklin, Tennessee.
Yes, I did.
The golden doodle specifically. Am I right?
And go to a Taylor Swift concert. Like all these things that I really want.
But there you go,
But and oftentimes we live out of that place of strong desires because it's just quick. We know it. It's surfacey, so to speak. It can still be really good things. Like I want to be an intentional parent, all those things. But that we also have really deep desires. And as believers with regenerative hearts, our deepest desires, I believe, is to be connected to God and be a person of love. That's what John Mark says, and I totally agree with it. But the question is, what are we living out of? Strong desires or deepest desires? And then disappointments, which I think a lot of times we just don't talk about. And so we don't really have a framework of how do we work through our disappointments. Instead, I think we can get often disillusioned. Okay, I'm disappointment. I feel stuck. I don't know how to work through that. And Lord, I feel disillusioned because I thought you were going to come through on this. I thought if I did X, Y, and Z, my life would look like this. And so I think it's so important to talk about these things. And then it kind of goes in a cycle of like, we had a desire, we kind of put ourselves out there, and then we get disappointed, and so we shut the desire down. We just feel like it's not safe. We need to kind of just deaden it. And the result is what we've been talking about, is then we don't live fully alive because we're kind of dead to our desires and longings. So the question is, how do we become people who stay awake to our desires and longings, are honest with our desires and longings, and are also honest about our disappointments and learn to work through those so that we can keep desiring. John Eldredge, in his Waking the Dead book, which is so good, he just talks so much about this of like, if we aren't fully, like if we're not awake to our desires, then we're not fully alive. And he has so much in there. And I think there's so much around desires. I think for Christian women, when we hear that, we can feel afraid of desires, because I think a lot of times we're brought up thinking like desires are bad. Like, like the desire to have sex before marriage is bad. So just shut it down. And so, or we can know like, oh, my desire may not have the purest motive. So I just need to like shut that down. And then I think, what we talked about is then when a desire doesn't come to fruition, sometimes that can be the most painful part of life. And so, there's a reality of like, yes, disappointments happen, and it can be so disheartening. And there's also the reality of there are disordered desires.
Totally.
You know, there are desires. And I quoted in my book, I forget who said it, but he was just saying how he can tell between a disordered desire and a godly desire is if the desire draws him to connection with God and connection with others, or if it makes him more selfish.
Isolated or selfish.
And selfish. And so I think that is such a key thing. But if you know that you are a believer and have a regenerative heart, our deepest desires are really to connect to God and to be people of love. And so we can dream, we can desire, we can ask the Lord for things. I think this is such an important conversation to have.
Yeah. There was a book I read in seminary before I dropped out called Disordered Loves, Disordered Lives, Reordered Loves, Reordered Lives. And that's such a amazing, you can just get it from the title, the framework of like, so much of our life is about, everything can be traced back to our loves, you know, and our loves are disordered before they're reordered around Jesus. And so most of life and maturity is reordering them in a healthy way, putting them in their right place, you know, and yeah, because disordered loves lead to, as they said, disordered lives. It's like the loves are what's central. And then Rolheiser too has this concept where he kind of says we're all sexed from birth, and it's just him using that in the Greek sense of the word, which means to, you know, comes from the Greek word sakare, which just means to cut off. Like, so we're all cut off from birth, and that's even the first cry of a baby is that this primal, like, you're cut off, desiring and looking with open eyes for like the attachment. Who can I attach to? Where can I find that wholeness again? I've been cut off. Where can I be made whole? And he's like, and that's basically the journey of all of life from the minute the baby opens their mouth for the first cry. And so you have to start there, because if you don't realize that is really like that's like kind of the tick of your soul, the kind of the clock, the seconds clicking of your soul, the drum beat of your soul, maybe is another way to put it, then you'll just not even know what you're doing. So you have to start there. That's ground zero of that you're longing to be made whole. And that can only ultimately be found in Jesus. Now, I think we overcrank that actually to some degree. I think that meets our centered desire.
Yeah.
But I also think that doesn't mean that other desires aren't necessary, needed, and valid.
Yeah, so good.
You know, desires for companionship and for intimacy and for relationship and for meaning, and like these are God-given desires. Because what we do when we overcrank that, you have a God-shaped hole in your heart and only God can fill it. That is true from like a salvific and an identity-based perspective. But we're also created to place our identity in all these other things in a tiered way. Meaning, like, you have other identities that are okay. Like, I am a father, and I should be a father, and I should desire to be a godly father. That's not idolatry.
Yeah.
It is if it becomes idolatry, like if that's somehow the biggest pursuit of my life over and against God. So it's like a stair step that God has to be the center, has to be the most primary and primal identity. Then secondary identities are actually really deeply meaningful and what we are created for. It's just when they become, again, disordered and you get that order wrong, that becomes really, really wonky. So I think that's really, really key and really, really important, and you have to start there. But I think, the desire conversation is really interesting in the church, because a lot of us either cut off our desires, we say our desires are unholy, or they're too mundane, or desires have led us to a lot of disappointment.
Yeah.
So then we say, I'm just going to stop desiring. When desiring is kind of like, desires are what keeps us alive. And what is it? Is it Psalm 16 that says kind of, give me pleasures forevermore at your right hand? And there's other psalmists, talking about like, there is an interesting convergence. Here's what I'll say. When you go from, as you mature more and more like Jesus, I do think there is something to be said about your desires start to become more like his.
Yeah.
And that's what you want to always measure. You want to measure, are my desires becoming more selfish? Are they becoming more self-centered? Are they becoming more isolated? Or are my desires over years, you can only track this in years, not days or weeks or months, because you shouldn't even be concentrating at all in that context. You should be becoming more like Jesus. And then every couple of years, look back, kind of like a tree growing, and be like, oh, that tree is 2 feet taller now. Same with your desires. Like, are my desires slowly but surely wanting what God wants, liking what God likes, looking for what he looks for? And that's really, really important. I think that you have to be asking yourself that in seasonal ways.
And I think the beautiful thing with Jesus is that he wants our hearts.
Yeah.
He wants us to be honest. And so I think sometimes it's like, Lord, I don't even know how to pray about that because I don't know if that's a desire you want for me, or I don't know if that's a godly desire or whatever. Be honest with him.
Yeah.
Like, pray about it. If you have a desire, ask God and keep asking him and keep asking him and keep asking him. And as you pray and spend time with him, he will change your desire to match his. And I think one of the most beautiful prayers that you can pray, still be honest, still ask him for the things. But you can, at the end, be like, Lord, do all that is in your heart to do in this situation. Ask the Lord for everything that you want, everything that you think it should be. But then at the end, be like, I just pray that you do all that is in your heart to do. And I think as we are honest and as we seek the Lord in prayer, our hearts will become aligned with his. And he will shape and form us. And sometimes it means, it stays exactly how we started praying. And sometimes I've experienced where my desires are completely different because I'm seeing now how the Lord is changing my heart as I pray. And so I think just this alignment with God and our desires, but not feeling, I think sometimes in the past, I've felt like I don't even know how to ask for that because I don't even know, God, if you want that. Yeah. Instead of just like a good father, just talk to him about it. Yeah. Like, let's have the conversation. Let's keep asking. Let's keep having this conversation until that our hearts are aligned in it.
Yeah. And then when you read the scriptures, be encouraged. And I mean, in the actual canon, so like God's actual uppercase word, it's his people, David specifically and other people specifically, just being so viscerally honest with desires.
Yes, yeah.
Of just desiring for their enemies to die, desiring for, the pain to stop, desiring for, you can go on and on of just like really visceral feelings. And he takes them to the Lord and lets the Lord morph and manage and transform them. And so some get kind of like put through the crucible, of like, oh, I do wish hate on my enemy. But as you take that to the Lord and that desire and you're honest with it, then he transforms it to love for his enemy, love for your enemy. You take the pain of grief or whatever to him and he transforms that to a really, really gentle spirit that empathizes with people around them with grief and suffering. Like you can go on and on, but that transformation of your desires can't happen unless you take them to him. It's kind of like if you're not even sitting down at the table with him with your desires, then they'll never be transformed. And they'll never be it's kind of back to, again, that differentiation thing. They need to come in, sit, change, adapt, morph, transform, and then they get kind of sent back out in a holy, blessed, kind of sacred way. And I think that's really, really important. So anything you would say as we kind of are wrapping up this season of things you're thinking about to the women as they've responded to the podcast and thought about it, and when you're going out and talking to women, as I think this is what's cool is this is a moment that God does seem to be stirring in his church of like thinking about these topics, thinking about these things. Yeah. But as you think about them, any final thoughts from the book as you're kind of as you're getting out there and you've written it and people are starting to read it, that you're just starting to see patterns based in or questions kind of coming around back on it or anything like that?
Yeah, I think just more and more I hear people, I just sense this like pressure that every woman is holding and the sense of like, I'm afraid if I do anything, it's just going to all come apart. Yeah. Like if I make one wrong step, if I'm actually honest about how I'm feeling or about my disappointments, or it's almost like we're just all holding our breath. Yeah. Like we're just trying to get through the days. And I hope that this book is really an invitation for you to come just as you are, to learn to be honest with yourself, learn to be honest with God, and to actually work through disappointments, areas where we feel like we need to take control, the fears that we have, and really become people that are deeply connected with God. And as we're deeply connected with God, become very sturdy and grounded in who we are and who we are in Christ. And I think one of the key things to that I can't say enough is learning to be honest. I think for Christian women, that is so hard because we feel like we've talked about, like we just need to keep the peace with everybody. Yeah. That we don't need to think about ourselves. We got to think about, as Christian women, like it just needs to be all about everybody else. Yeah. And then we also feel like, gosh, the Bible, we hear so many messages that are so good about victory and miracles and answered prayer. And so, or like have hope, have joy. Well, what do we do when we don't have hope and joy? What do we do when we are really disappointed? am I sinning because I'm disappointed?
Yeah.
And am I sinning because I'm actually disappointed with you, God? And like, how could I actually admit that? How could I admit that to you, to myself, and to other people? And the reality is we're human, and that we will have really hard things in life and moments in life that are really difficult. And when we can learn to be honest with ourselves, self-aware, honest to God about those things, and then honest with other women and other people in our lives, that is when the healing comes. That is when the breakthrough comes. That's when the not aloneness comes around. And I was part of this cohort of women the last 3 years from like age 20. There's like women in there from age 25 to 60. And it kind of started off as like, hey, let's help each other with our businesses. Let's sharpen each other while also still all being believers. And it really became more of a safe place to really share our hopes and griefs and really care for our souls together. And one of the greatest takeaways that I have from that group that was really just such a blessing in my life was learning to be honest with one another. I think it's one thing to be honest with myself. It's one thing to be honest with God, but it's another thing to be honest with somebody else of like, I don't know if God's going to come through with this.
Yeah.
I am feeling so scared that this is happening to my child, and grieving with each other, and also hoping, like, I'm really hoping and praying for this specific thing. And to do that with other women, it's life-changing. Mm-hmm. And for someone to look you in the eyes to say, wow, that must be really hard. Of course you feel that way. And then to be prayed over, and not just like, Lord, may you bless her, but like actually prayed over, walking shoulder to shoulder with someone. And so that's my prayer, is that we become women who can be really honest with our lives, with our reality. I think that's the thing that I've learned in my 30s is I'm naturally a dreamer. I'm naturally very idealistic. You can ask Jeff. Like, I just thought my life would look so different than what it looks like. And to you on Instagram, it looks really great. And I have so many blessings, and so many of my prayers have come true. But my reality, every blessing has a burden. Mm-hmm. Reality is not what I thought it would be. And learning to come to God with our realities and actually live in that, and then let the Lord form us in our realities, that is the beauty of walking with God. And I think that's something that we always have to fight on Instagram, because we just see the ideals. Yeah. We just see the polished versions, the 10% that is so wonderful and joyful and answered prayers. But learning to really come to God in our realities is so key.
Yeah. Yeah, so guys, we'll end this one just a minute or two short because I think that's the perfect way to end, is like being honest with your reality in partnership with Jesus and his plan for you is the goal of what we just tried to accomplish this whole podcast. Mm-hmm. So be honest with your reality in partnership with Jesus, with his goal in mind for you and what he wants you to become and who he wants you to become. Till then, we'll see you next time.